4 a.m., along the Venezuela-Colombia border, the night was split by an invisible storm of signals. Deep in the rainforest, American satellites detected a surge of heat signatures, vehicles, generators, and armed patrols circling a compound hidden beneath the canopy. Analysts at U.S. Southern Command leaned over their screens as the coordinates locked in. It was Fuerte Laguarita, a jungle fortress long rumored to be the meeting point between the Colombian guerrilla faction ELN and the Cartel network led by Guerrero. Inside that compound, millions of dollars in cash were stacked beside crates of cocaine, 10 tons in total, enough to generate nearly $2 billion once it reached the global market. Around the perimeter, guards manned heavy machine guns and lookout towers. Every path into the base was mined. From the air, it looked impenetrable. But in a command room hundreds of miles away, the Americans already had its heartbeat mapped out. Drones circled at high altitude, each laser marking a path for incoming teams. The order from Washington was clear: intercept the deal, dismantle the operation, and bring the targets out alive, if possible. Far below, in the humid dark of the jungle, 195 U.S. Special Operations troops moved without a word. SEALs, Delta, and Raiders converging from 3 directions. When the first shot broke the silence, would the fortress survive even 5 minutes? They had rehearsed this night 1,000 times on screens and simulators, and now the rehearsal tightened into a single sequence of moves. In Key West, Joint Task Force South drew the map one last time, folding in feeds from every sensor the U.S. could bring to bear. MQ-9 Reapers orbited at altitude, streaming thermal layers. A P-8A Poseidon swept maritime approaches and listened for engine signatures on frequencies too faint for human ears. Overhead, reconnaissance satellites fed a living mosaic of the compound and its approach routes. Every hole in the canopy, every trail through the undergrowth, every shadow that could hide a man was highlighted in a grid on the analysts' monitors. The plan was surgical and brutal in its simplicity. Surround, attack, suffocate, seal the exits, deny communications, collapse the node before it can disperse. The task force assembled like a clockwork engine. SEALs moved to cut river egress with RHIBs standing by. Delta operators took high ground with Barrett M107S zeroed out to 2 kilometers. Marine raiders threaded sensor packages and trip lines to turn the jungle into a counted space. Air Force Special Operations coordinated timing windows so that every strike package would arrive within the same heartbeat. Logistics were as important as bullets. Fuel bladders, medevac routes, redundant comms, and encrypted links were checked and checked again, while linguists and intelligence analysts prepared target folders with names, aliases, and probable hide sites. In the humid dark, where jungle breath mixed with diesel, the Americans moved like a single organism, quiet, precise, and ready to compress hours of fighting into minutes. At 3:30 a.m., the plan moved from paper to dirt. Under a moon swallowed by clouds, the task force dispersed into its assigned lanes. From the south, SEAL Team 6 slipped ashore in inflatable RHIBs, engines cut, paddles silent. Their M4A1 carbines fitted with suppressors meant shots would whisper, not scream. To the west, Delta teams climbed ridgelines, hauling Barrett M107 anti-materiel rifles into camouflaged positions and emplacing M249s to cover likely egress routes. Marine raiders fanned out from the northeast, emplacing seismic sensors and pressure mats to turn every footstep into a dot on a digital map. Above them, the sky told another story. MQ-9 Reapers loitered at 15,000 feet, their multispectral cameras resolving heat through canopy and rain. A P-8A Poseidon swept the riverways, its acoustic sensors listening for outboard motors. Its crew relayed engine signatures to analysts who matched them against known smuggling profiles. Using LiDAR and previous satellite passes, analysts in Key West produced a 3D overlay of the compound. Roofs, courtyards, likely tunnel mouths, all fed down to operators in real time. Communication was layered and redundant. Encrypted data links kept squads connected to command and to one another even when cartel jammers attempted to blind them. Every sector had a designated sniper and a contingency plan. If the river exit was compromised, RHIBs would block. If the ridgeline was lost, air assets would shift to close the gap. The final movements were choreography. Teams synchronized watches, breathed once, and melted into the green. In that hour before the strike, the jungle no longer felt random. It had become a measured space, a battlefield drawn in pixels and footsteps, each position deliberate, each route covered, every escape sealed before the first shot fell. At 3:47 a.m., a single patrol changed everything. A pair of cartel lookouts, moving a resupply crate along a narrow berm, rounded a bend and walked into a green laser dot. A SEAL sniper, breathing slow, squeezed. One alarmed shout in Spanish, and the jungle answered with gunfire. The first minute of chaos was raw and violent. Tracer lines stitched the darkness as AK-47s and PKMs barked from the compound. RPGs arced like angry comets and detonated against outer barriers. Cartel fighters fought with practiced brutality. They used pre-laid firing lanes, marched through choke points they had reinforced the week before, and fed suppressive fire to cover comrades retreating into camouflaged tunnel mouths. They detonated pressure-wired claymores and popped smoke charges to mask movement. Radio panels emitted bursts of deliberate static. Technicians inside the compound toggled frequency hoppers, trying to jam the Americans' data links. The U.S. response was clinical. Marine raiders returned controlled volleys with M27 IARS and M240S, while Delta operators sent M203 grenades into suspected rooms to flush combatants into the open. Thermal optics painted every heat source in hard green, and forward observers called targets with surgical calm. MQ-9 Reapers streaked overhead, dropping infrared illumination rounds that pierced the smoke and turned the courtyard into a stage of moving silhouettes. Even as one Reaper took an incoming round and spiraled down in a black smear, another sustained overwatch and relayed coordinates without pause. At 4 a.m., commanders in the field confirmed target geometry. Teams adjusted for blast effects and civilian risk. Then the order went out: execute Iron Veil. At 4:05 a.m., synchronized breaches detonated at 3 points. Linear charges peeled back steel doors. Door bundles blew outward in sheets of metal. The assault teams flowed through the gaps. Stack, clear, move, each room a micro battle. In that first 60 seconds, more than 1,000 rounds were fired across the compound. The ferocity of the cartel's counterfire left 3 American operators wounded and a Reaper lost to enemy fire, but it also exposed the limits of improvised defenses. The enemy had trained for this. Their tunnel network allowed quick, chaotic movement, and the mines slowed advance. Their jammers bought seconds of confusion. Yet precision targeting and integrated fires stripped those advantages away, square by square. As smoke and flame began to claim the outer sheds, command reported a new development. Heavy assets were inbound, silhouetted on high-altitude radar. Above the canopy, something larger was coming. And the question rapidly shifted from whether the fortress would fall to how utterly it would be erased. The fight shifted from chaos to precision as U.S. forces targeted key positions with calculated fire. Forward air controllers marked structures for Reaper drones, while ground teams fed exact grid coordinates into the strike chain. Hidden Javelin units locked onto 2 armored trucks stacked with cocaine, and twin impacts turned them into fireballs that lit the jungle like a false dawn. As stored munitions ignited, secondary blasts tore through the compound, but discipline held. Medics worked under fire, engineers cleared tripwires, and units pushed inward. When cartel jammers briefly cut communications, squads fell back on hand signals and pre-planned drills, holding formation until contact was restored. A Reaper hovering above struck the command node with a single hellfire, collapsing the structure and shattering coordination. With control lost, scattered fighters tried to regroup, only to find every escape sealed by overlapping fields of fire. Precision had turned resistance into silence. By 4:17 a.m., the courtyard was a tableau of smoke, scorched metal, and spent casings. The remaining defenders funneled toward tunnel mouths that now brimmed with heat and dust. 3 U.S. operators were wounded and evacuated. 1 Reaper was a total loss. Sensor feeds from Key West showed 2 heavy bombers appearing as distant blips on the horizon, an unmistakable signal that higher-level authorization for escalation was available. Between the flame and the fallout, 2 black shapes are descending from the sky. Is this the final act Washington has been holding in reserve? At precisely 4:23 a.m., the night sky tore open. 2 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, invisible until that moment, had been circling at 40,000 feet, awaiting a single coded confirmation from U.S. Southern Command. Each carried 2 GBU-57 A/B massive ordnance penetrators, 13-ton weapons designed to punch through reinforced bunkers before unleashing a shockwave that could turn concrete into dust. From the jungle below, the sound came seconds later, a deep, rolling thunder that seemed to bend the air. Operators on the ground dropped to their knees as the blast front raced across the canopy. The first bomb drilled straight through the fortress's main warehouse. The second struck the command bunker buried beneath meters of soil and steel. The detonations landed almost simultaneously, shaking the entire plateau. A column of fire rose hundreds of feet into the air, illuminating the tree line in unnatural daylight. The shockwave flattened tents, splintered trees, and silenced every remaining gun. From orbit, satellites registered a heat bloom brighter than any city for 50 miles. On the ground, the operators moved quickly, checking weapons, re-establishing comms, and pushing through smoke thick as rain clouds. The fortress was gone. Every cocaine cache, weapons depot, and fuel tank ignited in a chain reaction. The estimated economic loss? $2 billion, erased in under 3 minutes. Yet the chaos also revealed opportunity. U.S. assault teams breached the remaining bunkers, pulling dazed survivors from the rubble. 12 high-value operatives were captured alive, including Sombra, the ELN commander, and several lieutenants who had served under Nino Guerrero. But the man himself was gone. Intelligence later indicated that Nino had slipped through a reinforced escape tunnel minutes before the B-2 strike. He left behind encrypted drives, coded ledgers, and sat phone fragments, proof of a financial network stretching from Caracas to the Balkans. In a way, his disappearance deepened the victory. The fortress was destroyed, yet the data it held now exposed the empire he built. As dawn began to break, helicopters hovered over a landscape of molten steel and craters still smoking. The bombers were already homebound across the Atlantic, their mission clocks reading less than 7 hours. On the ground, exhausted American troops watched the horizon fade from orange to gray. What remained of Fuerte Laguarita was no longer a fortress, but a message carved into earth and fire, a statement of what U.S. precision could do when the order was absolute. But why had Washington chosen to obliterate rather than occupy? And more unsettling, had Nino Guerrero truly been eliminated, or was he already rebuilding his empire somewhere in the shadows? When the explosions finally ceased, the meaning behind them came into focus. Operation Iron Veil had never been about occupation, it was about proof. Washington wanted the world to see what happens when deterrence stops being theory and becomes fire. The destruction of Fuerte Laguarita was not a loss of ground. It was a statement of reach. At 4:23 that morning, precision had become policy. The Pentagon called it a demonstration strike, a carefully calculated reminder that the United States could project decisive force into any hostile network on the planet, regardless of borders or banners. No advance warning, no public buildup, only speed, accuracy, and silence. As dawn crept over the smoldering canopy, the message was already traveling across encrypted channels to command centers from Key West to Washington. But while the jungle still burned, another mission was already in motion, to uncover what the flames had not erased, the secrets buried beneath the ash. The fire had barely cooled when the next phase began. Under the rising haze, American operators in blast suits and respirators pushed through the ruins, their boots sinking into ash and melted steel. They weren't searching for survivors. They were hunting information. Every fragment, every device that could still hold data, became a priority target. Technical exploitation teams unpacked hardened laptops from waterproof crates, connecting portable power units and forensic imagers right there in the jungle. They cloned drives, dumped memory, and photographed burned circuit boards for serial tracking. Each recovery was tagged, sealed, and flown to the USS Baton offshore, where a forward analysis cell had already gone active. What they found told a story far larger than drugs. Dozens of encrypted ledgers mapped out offshore accounts, logistics networks, and coded references to intermediaries in Africa and the Balkans. Sat phones held unsent messages, scheduling cargo transfers through the Caribbean. A seized mini-server, still warm from backup power, showed digital traces of wire transactions worth hundreds of millions. For the Americans, these discoveries were the true victory. The fortress had fallen, but its memory was intact, a live snapshot of a criminal empire's infrastructure. Intelligence officers called it a jackpot in ashes. In Washington, analysts would later say those terabytes of data mattered more than the destroyed cocaine, because they revealed what no bomb could reach, the structure behind the trade and the people who thought they were invisible. Inside one of the surviving bunkers, a discovery shifted the tone from counter-narcotics to counterintelligence. Amid the charred crates and shattered rifles lay weapon parts stamped with Cyrillic markings, components that had no business in a jungle cartel. Nearby, engineers recovered radio antennas bearing serial numbers traced to commercial suppliers in Shenzhen. Even the surveillance drones found among the wreckage carried hybrid flight controllers, civilian shells fused with encrypted modules designed for military communication. Each item pointed to a deeper network. Forensic teams logged the serials, cross-checked export registries, and traced them through layers of shell companies in Panama, Serbia, and Hong Kong. The pattern was unmistakable. Fuerte Laguarita had not just been funded by narcotics, it had been equipped through an international gray market that blurred the line between commerce and covert supply. At Joint Task Force South, analysts overlaid the recovered data onto procurement maps, connecting every fragment to its point of origin. The result was striking. This was no longer a cartel fortress. It was a hybrid outpost built with foreign technology, shielded by criminal finance, and erased by precision air power before it could evolve into something far more dangerous. Even as smoke still drifted over the tree line, the U.S. command network was already shifting posture. The destruction of Fuerte Laguarita wasn't treated as an ending. It was a recalibration. Within hours, new satellite tasking orders were issued from Key West. MQ-9 Reapers extended surveillance grids across the Venezuelan frontier, while P-8A Poseidon aircraft swept the Caribbean shipping lanes for any vessel linked to the shattered network. On the ground, Task Force South redrew its operational map. Red zones, once marked as cartel corridors, turned blue as patrol routes expanded and naval pickets tightened the perimeter. Electronic warfare units recalibrated frequencies to counter the jamming techniques the cartel had used hours earlier. The objective was clear: prevent any surviving cells from re-establishing control before they could regroup. The effect was immediate. Intercepts showed regional traffickers abandoning transit routes and halting communications altogether. In the Caribbean, Coast Guard cutters reported cleaner radar space. The usual clusters of go-fast boats had simply vanished. For Washington, that silence was a sign of success and a warning at once. The raid had achieved dominance through precision, but dominance demanded maintenance. In the war of persistence, every hour after the strike mattered as much as the minute it began. Victory, as commanders like to say, now meant staying alert. While the jungle settled into silence, Washington was already dissecting the operation. Inside the Pentagon's command briefings, maps of the Venezuela-Colombia frontier glowed under harsh light as officers replayed every phase of the raid. On paper, Operation Iron Veil was flawless. 0 civilian casualties, total destruction of the target, full recovery of high-value intelligence. But around the table, the tone was less celebratory than analytical. Precision had worked, but it had also exposed how thin the margin for error truly was. Defense analysts described the mission as a blueprint for future warfare. Short-duration strikes, limited footprints, and seamless coordination between intelligence and air power. It was, in their words, the future of deterrence. Yet that future came with cost. 3 operators were still in recovery at a military hospital in Puerto Rico. 1 Reaper drone lay scattered across a Venezuelan hillside, and maintenance teams were already preparing replacement modules for the systems pushed beyond tolerance. In the Situation Room, senior officials acknowledged both triumph and tension. The strike proved what America could do, and how visible that power had become. In an age where every explosion was recorded from orbit, deterrence was no longer just about capability. It was about control, the discipline to unleash destruction only when every second and every consequence had been calculated in advance. Even as American officials reviewed the success, a new directive quietly went out across classified channels. Find Nino Guerrero. The man who had escaped through a reinforced tunnel before the bombs fell was now the most wanted figure in the Western Hemisphere. His empire was gone, his assets frozen, but his reputation and his ability to rebuild made him more dangerous than before. Southern Command launched a follow-on effort, codenamed Operation Black Current. It wasn't a battlefield mission, but an intelligence pursuit. Satellites scanning remote roads, SIGINT intercepting encrypted chatter, and financial analysts tracing the ripples of hidden wire transfers. Every time a small account moved in Panama or Bogota, an alert flashed red. Drone teams flew deep surveillance over the jungle corridors once under his control. One MQ-9 tracked a convoy disguised as humanitarian transport crossing toward Colombia. By the time a response team moved, it had vanished among civilian routes. Guerrero was adapting, using human terrain the way he once used bunkers, invisible by design. To the Pentagon, his escape didn't weaken the victory, it extended its purpose. The hunt itself became proof of reach, a reminder that American persistence didn't end with the explosion. Guerrero might have escaped the blast, but now the chase had entered the shadows, where silence was a weapon and time the only variable that mattered. By the week's end, the jungle had cooled, but the echo of the strike still hung in the air. For Washington, Operation Iron Veil marked more than a tactical success. It was a statement about what modern warfare had become. Precision, coordination, and discipline had replaced size and spectacle. The U.S. had proven that deterrence could be delivered not by armies, but by data, timing, and the willingness to act alone when threats blurred national lines. Still, commanders knew deterrence never stood still. Each victory forced adaptation, and somewhere beyond the border, new players were already studying the crater at Fuerte Laguarita for lessons of their own. Power, after all, was not the blast itself. It was the control behind it. In the end, the jungle fell quiet again. Yet the silence was not peace. It was vigilance. the pause between wars that only professionals recognize. The raid was a triumph of discipline and technology, but if the survivors regroup and strike from the dark, is America ready for another war in the shadows? By sunrise, only faint columns of smoke twisted above the crater where Fuerte Laguarita had once stood. The mission was over, yet the operation's shadow still moved. Intelligence confirmed that several of Nino Guerrero's lieutenants had slipped into Colombia, using the chaos to vanish into the mountains. Joint U.S.-Colombian teams began pursuit before the wreckage had even cooled. The hunt had simply changed shape. For Washington, the results were undeniable. 12 high-value targets captured, 20 wounded, 3 American operators injured, and nearly $2 billion in cartel assets erased. The destruction of 10 tons of cocaine and $95 million in cash marked not just a financial loss, but the end of a network once thought untouchable. What had begun as a night raid had become a strategic reset. Proof that American reach remained absolute. As daylight broke, the extraction teams moved with practiced precision. Medics stabilized the wounded, engineers sealed evidence, and Blackhawks lifted through the haze, rotors scattering ash over the clearing. No celebration followed, only quiet professionalism. On board the command aircraft, officers reviewed live telemetry of departing units, each transmission confirming a single word: complete. At the Pentagon, analysts summarized the raid as a surgical model for future warfare. Short, data-driven, and devastatingly effective. Still, the escape of Nino Guerrero left one line unclosed, a reminder that even victory carries unfinished echoes. Commanders understood the truth. Deterrence was not a strike, but a posture, something earned and maintained with vigilance. As the last helicopters disappeared beyond the horizon, the forest began reclaiming what was left. In time, the grass would return, but from orbit, the scar would remain visible, a perfect circle cut into the earth. For allies, it was reassurance. For enemies, a warning. The sky above the rainforest had burned once, and if challenged again, it would burn the same way. If you believe that discipline and technology have kept the world safer, subscribe to Military Power, where truth is told through fire and pride. See you next time.